my name is Mark Johnson. I came all the way from San Francisco, California to tell you a story. And the story I'm going to tell you is about Zite, the company that I ran for a few years, and how we sold it not once, but twice. My handle on Twitter is @philosophygeek, and you're welcome to tweet anything I say. So, I'm a goal-oriented guy, so I wanted to start off with kind of what my presentation style is going to be. So I'm going to tell you a story of Zite, and I'm going to try to give you some observations along the way of what I learned, and hopefully some of it will be useful to you. But what you're not going to get out of this is there's no easy formula to start a startup, and certainly there's no easy way to sell your company twice. So I hope that some of these stories will be useful to you as you begin your own entrepreneurial journey. So the first thing I learned in startups is to be yourself. So a little bit about me before we even start. I'm unemployed right now. I put this in here because a new friend of mine from Poland, I've been here for a few days now, when I came up to him and I told him I was unemployed, and then he learned my story afterwards, he said, "Oh, well, you shouldn't tell people you're unemployed." But frankly, I just love the look on people's faces when I tell them I'm unemployed and they don't really know what to say after that. It's all about just being yourself. Like, I think that's funny, so I do that. So, be true to yourself no matter what. So I went to Stanford University, and I started off as a math major. Then I was a computer science major for a little while, but I ended up as a philosophy major. And these are two of my favorite philosophers. On the left is Nietzsche, and on the right is Richard Rorty. And philosophy has influenced me a lot. And one of the big lessons I learned from Richard Rorty was that he said that poetry has a lot more to tell you about philosophy than philosophy does. And I think this is actually analogous to business, is that if you want to learn how to run a business, you're going to find a lot more inspiration by taking a hike, by reading a novel, than by reading a business book or reading a lot of business blogs. So I think it's a constant reminder to myself that, my philosophical upbringing teaches me that business is not necessarily just about business. So a little bit about my resume. So I went to Stanford, studied philosophy. Then I worked for a series of startups. So I have kind of an addiction to search. I worked for a travel search company called Sidestep. I worked for a categorized search company called Cosmix, and then a natural language search company called PowerSet. And what's cool is that all of those companies actually exited somehow. So Sidestep and Cosmix, unfortunately, I was not there when they exited, but PowerSet I was. And that was in 2008 when we sold to Bing. And then I became a product manager at Bing, working on sort of all sorts of interesting things on the search engine backend. So that's where the story of Zite begins. And the most important lesson I learned there is don't give up. So something that most people don't know about Zite is it's an extremely old company. It was founded in 2005. Now, that was a very long time ago, right? It's almost 10 years now. It was founded under a different name. I put a timeline up here for you. So in 2005, it was founded as Wario. It was founded by two guys from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And the idea was to do something different than what Google was doing. The idea was that Google was really good at finding you something when you knew what you wanted. So you type in the name of a restaurant, you're going to get the web page for the restaurant. But if you're just looking for cool restaurants to go eat at in Gdansk, you're not going to find that on Google, or you're not going to find it easily, at least back then. So the idea was to build this search engine that sort of understood you and understood the world around you and tried to deliver you things. Now, the product became very complicated very quickly. It was a search engine, it was a social network, it was a place where you could tag web pages, much like Delicious did. So they had a real product problem. And the way I became connected is I became an advisor in 2009 while I was working at Microsoft. So the guys from Wario were trying to figure out how to do awesome public relations. So they got the same PR firm as PowerSet. And the people at the PR firm realized that they could never get the same same coverage that we got at PowerSet because they just had a really bad product. So they called me up, they sent them over to me, and they asked me to become an advisor. And I was very honored. It was the first company I'd ever advised. And I was so happy that there was a company that wanted my advice. So I began as an advisor for for Wario. What I quickly learned was that they had great technology under the hood, even if they had a really bad product. So the question was, this company is now about 4, almost 5 years old. What do we do? They're running out of money. They had some seed investors. They had some money from the Canadian government. But at some point, they needed to make money. So what do? We decided to pivot. And I think this is a much overused term. I really love this quote from Mike Moritz. And he's basically saying that a pivot isn't just like, oh, I'm switching products a little bit. Pivot usually means I'm running out of money and something is going terribly, terribly wrong. But one important lesson I learned from this is that it's much easier to pivot from a core technology than it is from a product. That is, if your technology base is really strong, there's lots of product options you have, whereas changing from product to product is much more difficult. So we decided to build something that was very personal to me. So I had a problem. You all remember Google Reader. Now it's dead, but you remember the days where you were disincentivized from adding a new blog to Google Reader. So you would come back over the weekend, you were at the beach, and you came back to 999 unread items. So you mark them all as read, and then you go to lunch and you come back and there's 200 unread items. The question is, what should I be reading right now? What's important to me? So we built this Zite, this personal web filter on the web. Now we never released it. We use this as the product pivot, so using the same underlying technology as Wario, but with a new front end. The problem was that we went to the VCs, and web startups weren't hot then. Mobile startups were really hot. So we see the iPad come out, we see companies like Pulse and Flipboard, and we think, wow, they're going to have the same problem as Google Reader soon. I think we need to do something. I think we need to switch to mobile. Now this is a very American metaphor, and I'll try to explain it to you. This is what we call a Hail Mary. We're at the end of our rope here. We have about 9 months of money left. We estimate that the iPad will take us about 6 months. So we basically have 3 months after we release the product to go find more money. And a Hail Mary is in football. The idea is to get the football down to the other end of the field, and someone has to go catch it. And at the end of the game, if you have nothing left, you just throw the football down the field and you pray Hail Mary, full of grace, and you hope that someone on your team is going to catch the ball and score a goal. And luckily, we did. So Zite 1.0 came out on March 9th, 2010. And this is a company that had never more than 10,000 users. So Wario, during the previous 5 years, in total, had no more than 10,000 users. Day one of Zite, we had 25,000 downloads, which by today's standards is not a lot, but this is when only the iPad 1 was out. We were at the top of the iPad store, so we were the top free app for over 24 hours. Our servers crashed and crumbled because we didn't expect that kind of traffic. We were in print in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, so we had a lot of great coverage from the press. It was all very exciting. And it was around this time that I became CEO. So because I was a very active advisor and helped them to pivot the company, they asked me to become CEO. So why was Zite successful? I think at its core, we solved a really serious problem. I mentioned with Google Reader, you've got a lot of information overload, and we really solved that problem in a really unique way. Instead of going to a specific blog to read about technology, TechCrunch or VentureBeat or what have you, you could just subscribe to technology, and we would do the heavy lifting and figure out the kinds of things you like to read and give you more of it. I think it was also really key that we released on mobile first. So in a web browser, people don't read as much. The iPad is the perfect device for reading, and we found that, I'll show you some stats after this, that sort of prove that out. We also had a really powerful underlying technology, but this is really important. We didn't show off that technology directly to the user. We tried to have a very, very simple interface with all this powerful underlying technology, and it's really the simple interface that spoke to people. A lot of people didn't know that we had artificial intelligence under the hood powering Zite, and frankly, they didn't need to know that, right? All they needed to know was that whenever they opened Zite, there was something there that they wanted to read. So we had great stats from Zite. Even after 3 years, usually wouldn't give this stat, but we have 25% of our users still coming back on a monthly basis. It's about 20 minutes per user per day. The phones are about 18 minutes. The iPad is about 22 minutes, so they're very, very close to each other. And the average user reads 9 articles a day. So even I, as a very heavy Zite user, didn't quite read that much. So after I became CEO, about a week later, I learned another lesson that you're probably going to make people mad if you're doing something disruptive. So Zite was disrupting in a lot of different ways. So for one, we were disrupting the way people get news, that is through these channels like technology and finance rather than publications like TechCrunch and Fortune. And we were disrupting a business model. So what we basically did was in order to optimize pages on the iPad, we stripped out all the extraneous information, and extraneous information includes ads, and that really pissed off the media companies. We were looking for money on Sand Hill Road, which is where all the venture capitalists are, and this article came out right as we were in between meetings, and I was just mortified. I was so scared to go to the next meeting. And I'll never forget this. When I walked in, the VC sort of slapped me on the back and said, well, kid, you must be doing something right because the media companies are really pissed off. So it turned out that it was actually a really good thing for us. It helped us to start conversations with the media companies, even though it started off as a very nasty letter from a bunch of them. And also, it solidified our place in the market. We had a lot of downloads that day, and this really put us on the map. In fact, it put us on the map so much that we ended up selling to CNN. Now, that was actually a really interesting process. So my former boss, who was the head of CNN Digital, ended up seeing this article on All Things Digital, and he called us up and he said, hey, we're not really mad at you yet, can we partner with you? And we started talking to him, and then it turned out to, hey, can we invest in you? And then not too much later, he decided that he'd like to acquire us. And we were going through a process at that point, trying to decide whether we should take venture capital or sell to CNN. We made the decision to sell to CNN. And frankly, I was a little bit uncomfortable when we first did it. I was worried that I had just come out of the PowerSet acquisition of Microsoft, and I saw what a big company could do to a little company. I saw how it could crush its dreams and sort of ruin all of the great things that you've got in a small company. So I was really nervous. So I talked to my boss, and we had a dinner one night, and I told him he said, just tell me all of your fears, and if we can't work something out, then work here 6 months, and then we'll part ways. But we had a really honest conversation, and I think it worked out well. So it turns out that being part of CNN did not suck. And this is why. I think we were really honest during the negotiations. So hopefully you will all have the experience someday where you're negotiating with a company. And usually when you're negotiating a sale, the thing everybody focuses on is the price, right? That's the most important thing. But Zite is my baby, right? Zite was one of my favorite app that I've ever used. My mother used it every day. My best friend uses it. So it was very personal to me, and I wanted to make sure that we could continue to enhance Zite and make it better. I wasn't quite done yet. I'd only been CEO for 6 months by the time we got acquired. So I wanted to make sure that CNN shared that vision. So once I verified that, and I realized that they would give us a lot of independence. And another nice thing about having sort of a rich uncle like CNN is that you knew where your paychecks were coming from, and it really allowed us a lot of product freedom to go innovate. So what I focused on in order to make it successful was the first 100 days I knew were really important. We needed to hire some new employees, get the team built up. We also needed to do another release. At the time, we were only on the iPad, so I really wanted to release the iPhone because I wanted to show both the employees internally that we meant business and all of our customers that being bought by CNN wouldn't ruin us, and we did that. So we spent about 2 years at CNN, about 2.5 years, and we sold again. I think it's really interesting. And I thought about this before the presentation is why were we able to sell? Why were we able to sell to Flipboard for more money than CNN bought us? And I think it's the same reasons that you build value in a company originally when you want it to get bought. So it's all about the product, it's all about the technology, and it's all about your people. All of those things have great value to the market. And I'll go through some examples of each of those. So one thing we did was make a huge product bet. Zite 2.0. So Zite 1.0, again, kind of rushed out the door in 6 months, and it was a beautiful product. But it had a lot of limitations. We spent a lot of time analyzing user behavior, and we realized a few things that we wanted to change. One of them was pretty simple, is that originally Zite was an HTML5 app with a little bit of an iOS wrapper. We really wanted to take full advantage of the iOS functionality. Also, since we had built the iPhone after the iPad, turns out that the products were a bit divergent. There were things that you could do on the iPhone that you couldn't on the iPad and vice versa, and we wanted to make them much more similar. And a really important product goal was to give people access to all the categories we had. We have 25,000 categories in Zite, things like avant-garde, things like pyramid, architecture. I have everything from astronomy to zoology literally in my Zite. We wanted to show off these things, so we created modules that showed off some of the cool new categories, and we put topic tags on a lot of the articles. I think a few lessons from this is that you really need to know when to revamp your product. There are times to revamp and there are times not to. I think we had the luxury of some time with CNN, that is, we knew where our paycheck was coming from, as I said earlier. And we also analyzed the product really deeply, and we knew where some of its limitations were. So we tried to correct those. Another thing that I learned was we had released Android before we did Zite 2.0, and I think that was a mistake. Because once we released Zite 2.0, it was far superior to Zite 1.0, but unfortunately we only had the resources to build it on iOS, and Android didn't come out for about 8 months later. And that means that the Android fans, like me, I have an Android phone, had an inferior Zite experience. And I really wish that we had focused on that. I mean, also some silly things that we did in the early days is we released for Windows Phone, which I do not recommend to any app developer unless you're Windows Phone only. The market just isn't big enough. We even released for WebOS, which was another big mistake. So really ignore those minor platforms. Another thing we learned from this is that users are going to revolt, no matter how good the new release is. All the stats told us Zite 2.0 is far superior to Zite 1.0. The problem was that it's change, and users hate change. So what we did was we planned a 2.1 release almost immediately after the 2.0 release, where we corrected we read through every single one of the reviews in the App Store, and we figured out what the most important things that were bugging people were. And we fixed those, and people were thrilled. We went from 5 stars to 2 stars back to 5 stars, and we were really happy with that. Cool. We also made some mistakes with 2.0. So when you're founding a startup, when you're running a startup, you have to make mistakes. Be bold and challenge the world, but recognize your mistakes and clean up very quickly after them and don't make them again. I mean, I hate even looking at this slide. It's so embarrassing. This was our temporary logo that only lasted from Zite 2.0 to Zite 2.1, I think about 6 weeks. And users absolutely hated this. I'm not too fond of it either. His name is Ibu, it's French for owl, and users hated his eyes. People complained about the icon, that he was scary, and they would never let their kids use this, or they complained it was too kid-like, and everybody hated this. So in 2.1, we corrected this mistake and just went back to our word mark, and everybody was thrilled. So make mistakes like this, but clean up quickly after them. Another thing that we never forgot at CNN, while we were at CNN, was that technology is really important. So building a core technology adds a lot of value to the company, but it can also be used to drive product improvement. So not just through the user experience, but simply through improving the algorithmic results that we deliver to people. We increased daily article views per user from 8 to over 9 through a series of these algorithmic changes. I think it's really important to remember that your user experience is not just what the front end looks like. It's also the data that you're delivering to people. And we never forgot this at Zite, and I think it's one of the reasons that we were able to sell the Flipboard is we had this extremely strong technology base. I mean, I would argue that Zite has the best news personalization technology on the planet. So Flipboard got something pretty incredible with that. The last thing that's really important is building a great culture. People are your greatest asset. They're the people that are going to help you to build a great technology. They're the people that are going to think about this product really hard, live, eat, and breathe this, and build you a great product. But you need to form a great culture. I think one of the biggest reasons that you want to form a great culture is, I said, punch above your weight. And that basically means that you can hire people that are awesome. So my lead iOS developer came from Apple, and one of the reasons she came was that she loved the company culture and she loved the product. So I think that that's really important. And also, my team stayed together. We're very, very close. I mean, even though I don't work there anymore, I still text them all the time and go on hikes with them on the weekends. And if you play together, you stay together. So how do you do this? One thing that we did, of course, in interviews is you want to focus on intelligence, and capability. You want someone who can code, you want someone who can think about product, you want someone who's passionate about whatever you're doing. We always check for passion in our interviews. I actually became a culture check at the end. So I would only get candidates after they had been vetted by the rest of the team. And once they were good enough, they'd come to me, and I'd kind of verify that they were a good fit with the culture. But we actually added a second culture check eventually, and that was a social event. No interviews, no talking about work, just chilling out with the person for a little bit, usually in some social setting like a bar or something like that, and just to see if they fit in with the team. And that became a really good way of sort of checking in on whether this person fit with what we were building. So surprises are around every corner. So I never expected to be on stage here telling you about Zite being sold again. What I expected was at some point I would want to leave CNN and go build my own company. But last year we made the decision sort of internally at CNN that Zite was a great fit and CNN was a great partner. They helped incubate us and they helped me to build a lot of value in the company. But we decided that we couldn't really figure out how to integrate the technology, and we thought that the company would have more value if we put it somewhere else. So that's how we ended up selling to Flipboard. So the process is pretty simple. You call a few companies up, you see who's interested. We had a few interested parties, and we ended up deciding on Flipboard. I will tell you, sales take a lot out of you. So the whole process from deciding that we wanted to sell the company to actually signing on the dotted line was about 6 months for us, and that's fairly typical. 4 to 6 months is typical for a sale. So it really takes a lot out of you, but it's a great process because you can see all of the wonderful things you've done, and it's pretty exciting. So if you look at when we joined CNN and when we sold to Flipboard, lots of stuff happened. So we tripled the size of the team. I told you we redesigned Zite from the ground up. We expanded from platforms. The discovery technology got better. We inked deals with dozens of publishers. Those same people that sent us the nasty letter very early on, we inked deals with a lot of them, and that really gave us credibility in the market. We booked our first revenue. We had deals with Intel and Lululemon and other cool companies, and we built an integration to CNN. So we did a lot in a very short amount of time, and that's why we built a lot of value in the company. So that's the end of the story. I'm going to take questions after this, but a few more points. I think this is the most important lesson that I personally have learned about starting a company. I wish I had done it earlier. So I look at things like this and I just laugh. Like the Startup Owner's Manual, there's no book you can read that's going to tell you how to start a startup. You just have to go do it. Right now, there's money out there. The market is hot. And if you're capable, you're energetic, and you have a great idea, you can get funded. And guess what? You can go be a CEO too. There's no manual for this. And my only regret in my career is that I didn't do this sooner. It's a really fun job. It's really rewarding, and it's really cool to be able to look at something and say, wow, I helped the team build that. And then I think the last thing that we should always remember in startup land is to have fun. And I was inspired by this. This is, of course, your entry to Eurovision this year. And what I love about them is they just have fun on stage. Sure, they didn't win this year. And look at, probably whatever startup you start, whatever startup I start next is not going to win big. We're not going to be the next Google. We're not going to be the Facebook. But we are probably going to build something of value and just have fun doing it. If you're not having fun, then you're sort of missing out on the whole point. And that's all I have, and I would love to take some questions from the crowd because I always find that's really interesting to see what people have to ask. So I'm open. Lights. It's so dark out there.
Czy są pytania?
Here, don't be shy.
Okay, we have a question.
Hi there. Two things. First one was, what was the Flipboard's motivation in acquiring you? Was it to kill you, or was it to sort of occupy more marketplace in a way? And another question, did you get the first one?
The what? Sorry, I couldn't understand.
Oh, you didn't understand the first one?
Am I what?
Did you get the first question?
No, I didn't. Sorry,
Okay, so
they just turned on the sound. Now you can try it again.
I'll repeat, okay. What was Flipboard's motivation in acquiring you? Was it to kill you? as a competitor, or was it to acquire more market footage? That was the first question.
Wait, CNN or Flipboard?
With Flipboard.
Flipboard, well, I think that there's three things they got from us. So it really was product, technology, and team. So Flipboard just took a huge round of venture capital, and they need to hire quickly. And we had an awesome team of people who had thought a lot about this problem. So they're acquiring, to some extent, developers. They're also acquiring a lot of product knowledge. That is, Flipboard is a really cool product, but it's gotten more and more complicated. And we really thought hard about simplifying the product, and that's another thing they got from us. And the third thing is technology. We have amazing personalization technology, and when you combine that technology with Flipboard's reach, you get a really powerful combination. So I'm sure there's some element of them taking out a competitor, but all the other things were much more important to them than taking us out.
Right, thank you. And the next part of my question is, the cease-and-desist letter you got, what have you done straight after it? Because naturally you stayed in business, so you must have done something.
Yes. So, well, there's a few things there. Is we got the cease and desist, and it was from the who's who in the media world. So it was AP, Gannett, New York Times, Time Inc. Like, it was a lot of people. But when you added it all up, the cool thing about Zite is that there's no single publisher that dominates. So the New York Times is the biggest publisher in Zite, and that receives a little bit over 1% of total clicks. So what we did with all those publishers is we said any publisher who comes to us and doesn't like what we're doing, we will render your pages in web mode. So we'll act much like Google then. So we'll just be like a search engine. You click on the article and we'll take you to the web page. However, what we really wanted was to talk to these publishers and figure out a better business model. Our readers really preferred reader mode because it was cleaner, it was simpler, it was easier to read, and didn't have all these crappy ads on them that typically you find on media's pages. So we ended up, it was interesting because we started off with this nasty gram from the lawyers. But we quickly got calls from the business people who said, yes, don't worry, it's just the lawyers. We really want to figure out how to work with you. It's just about figuring out a model. So, after that cease and desist letter, I think probably about 9% of our articles were in web mode instead of reader mode. But after that cease and desist, you can count the number of additional publishers that came to us and had a problem with it on both my hands. So it was less than 10 publishers that happened after that. So what's good about us, what's good about it is it forced us to look for a business model earlier than we would have otherwise. So it worked out for us in a lot of different ways.
So Maciek asked the same question I was going to ask, but so I will ask another one. So I read recently that Peter Thiel, one of the early investors in Facebook, said that the most important thing in building the company is that you shouldn't fuck up the culture. He said something like that. So I was going to ask you, what do you think is the most important thing in building the company?
People. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I look at all the challenges that Zite had, from the cease and desist letter to that terrible logo that we released to all the other challenges that we had. And the one constant thing is having awesome people. And people say this a lot, but building a great culture is not easy. It's about having intelligent people. It's about having capable people. But even more importantly, it's about having the right people working together. And frankly, we made mistakes in hiring now and then. And luckily, we tried to correct them very quickly because one bad apple in a company can really ruin things. I can't say enough that you want to have smart people, but you also want to have really fun, not fun people. It depends on what your culture is, right? Whatever your culture is, you kind of want to have people who fit in. When I build my next company, the most important thing to me is going to be the co-founders that I co-found the company with and the first few employees. They're going to be critical to the success probably for the first 2 to 5 years of the company. So hire really smart early on, fire fast, they always say. Yeah, it's all about the people. Any more? Okay, well, if you're too embarrassed to ask a question in front of everybody, please come up to me after. I'll be here for the rest of the show, and I'll be at the party tonight, so come and say hi. Thanks.